Thank everybody for moving to the front. It wasn't so hard. I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker. He spent much of his career leading, managing, and seeking to understand people in order to create higher performing organizations and happier lives. That's a pretty low bar, huh? He's the recent author of the book, This Is It, and he's also a recognized global speaker on the topic of why and how to bring more humanity into the innovation equation. He's also a longtime friend of the Lewis family and a big supporter of Grand Circle, OAT, and GCCL. He spends a lot of time traveling internationally himself. It's my pleasure. Join me in welcoming Chris Colbert, please.
Morning. Firstly, actually, I was reading recently that in speaking, you're not supposed to thank people because you just supposed to cut to the chase, but screw that. I'm going to thank people. I want to thank Alan and Harriet for being crazy enough to invite me here today. I want to thank the travelers for being travelers, for living your lives fully. And I want to thank everybody else for giving me a couple hours of your life, and my goal is to give you something significant in return. So I have to divulge something. I know something about each of you. And what I know is that you're human. And because you're human, 98% of you won't remember 98% of what I'm about to say. It's true. Look, nobody's taking notes. Oh, wait, how many people are taking notes? No! So I'm going to give you the 2% that I think really matters. And my hope is that you walk out of here with this 2%. And you think about it, and you contemplate it, and you discuss it, and maybe you actually even apply it to your life, to your work, to your partnerships, to whatever. Okay, you ready for the 2%? Yep. Joan, you ready for the 2%? That whatever you are trying to do, whatever you're trying to make better, whatever you're trying to innovate, create, fix, succeed at, whatever it is, the way to increase the chance of success is to spend far less time working on the thing, the function, the technology, and spend far more time understanding the humans. At the end of the day, we are the only variable that actually creates value. And what's funny about humans is we get hung up on the stuff. This room in and of itself creates no value. This carpet creates no value. What creates value is when you connect the thing that you are trying to create or improve with the truth of the humans that it's being improved for. And the sad irony is we as humans spend very little time thinking about our own humanity. And that's really the point. And it does relate to thin places, and I will make that connection in about 10 minutes. Okay, so a year ago, my wife Kate and I went out to dinner in the North End. Sunday night, summer evening, 3 other friends, 5 of us, quiet restaurant. We sit down, and these are friends, good friends, and for whatever reason, it's just awkward. It's just weird. Like nobody's really talking. And so I do what I do. I fill voids. So I'm like, I start chatting, and I start telling jokes, and I start telling stories, and I start asking questions. And about 15 minutes in, Kate looks at me across the table and does this. Now, I speak, as Mark said, I speak around the world a fair amount, and I do tell the story a fair amount. And when I'm out there, I explain You know, I'm not sure in all countries they know what this means, so I explain that what this means, the polite version of what this means is please be quiet, and the impolite version is shut the hell up. So she does this to me, and I do what any grown, mature person would do. I stop talking for the remainder of the evening, making the already awkward evening even more awkward. We get through it. We're walking home down Commercial Street, and I stop her, and I look at her. Can I use you, Joan? Do you mind? And I'm like, honey, what was this? And she looks at me, and she says, darling, I love you, but sometimes your energy is just too much. Sometimes your storytelling is just too much. And sometimes your line of questioning is just too much. And I look at her and I say, darling, I love you. I have no issue with your issue with my energy. I have no issue with your issue with my storytelling, but I do have an issue with your issue with my questioning. And the reason why I have an issue with that issue is because I believe, and I believe this in the bottom of my heart, that questioning, the right questioning that gets you to the right answers is the root function of creating success in any form. Like if you want to improve the outcome of anything, you have to consider the questions you're asking to get to the real issue. And if you look at the data across every facet of society, we are not asking the right questions. And here's some examples. 75% of all startups fail. So I used to run the Harvard Innovation Lab, student and alumni startup incubator. 95% of those ventures fail. So these are pretty bright students, right? And they can't seem to get it right. 84% of corporate transformation efforts fail. Recent study revealed $1.3 trillion, T, not B, spent by big companies trying to transform themselves for the 21st century, and of that, $900 billion has been determined to be a waste of money. Okay? 95% of corporate innovation fails. Big companies with their big ideas and their big brains and their big budgets fail. Another set of stats. Just read these. 28% of college students in America take some sort of psychotropic drug for either anxiety, depression, or both. What scares me the most about this is a year ago, that number was 25%. So in 1 year, in 12 months, it went up 10%. 40% of Americans are obese. And based on a flight I took recently, I think that number's underreported. And then the last one, 25% of Americans are lonely, meaning they have no one to confide in. And that's just sad. But not only is it sad, and I'll call it a social epidemic, it's actually a health epidemic, because it turns out being lonely is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It has a physiological impact on yourself. So clearly, we are doing some things wrong here, right? And the thing that I believe we are doing wrong is we are not asking the right question. Because we're creating things that we don't want to create, or we're creating things that are failing. We're clearly not asking the right question. And the question I think we should ask is this: do we truly understand humanity? And I think the terrible answer is we don't. I think the terrible answer is we actually don't spend any amount of time thinking about our humanity. We don't. How many people have ever argued with their significant other? How many people are lying? Now, let me ask you again. How many people have ever argued with their significant other? Thank you very much. What's funny about arguing with one's significant other is how often do you put any amount of energy into understanding your significant other while you're arguing with them? Never. We think of the other as a function, as a role, as a statistic, as a demographic, as a psychographic, but we don't think of the other as an actual human with needs, wants, desires, fears, predilections, biases, ways. When Kate and I get into it, I never actually consider Kate. I'm just trying to win, man. So we don't think of humans as human. Whether the human is a customer, the human is a lover, the human is a partner, the human is a boss, the human is an employee, we think of them as functions, and that is a big mistake. And it's also a mistake because when we seek to solve complex problems, the truth is the problem is nowhere near as complex as the human. But we, in our humanness, try to make it all simple. And so there's this simple, you've seen this graphic before, and the inference of this graphic is we used to be this primate and primal, and we've evolved to Homo erectus, where the creature on the far right is incredibly rational and logical, and everything is well thought and pretty straightforward. And the fact of the matter is, the creature on the right is just as primal as the creature on the left, and the creature on the right is actually really complicated. Why we do what we do is complicated. Why we don't do what we should do is complicated. And why we shouldn't do what we do is complicated. I throw out the statistic that something like only 10% of U.S. households have any amount of retirement savings. What's that about? It's complicated. Now, the good news is there's this guy by the name of Abraham Maslow. How many know Maslow? Okay, so in addition to the 2% I gave you earlier, I'll give you like a 0.5%, which is just look up Maslow. There's some YouTube videos on him. This guy, he is a psychologist in the 50s, and he studied human behavior his whole career. And he came up with this structure of trying to capture really why people do what they do and why they don't do what they should do and why they shouldn't do what they do. And the gist of it is the nature of man is really a bottom-up proposition. That as we go through life, the first subconscious need is physiological. I want shelter, I want food, I want water, I need air. And this is where we're still primal creatures. As evolved as we claim we are still really primal creatures. And so our motivating forces are at the bottom level of this pyramid. And then the second level of need is around safety. And I think in the 21st century world, that translates into control. And then the third level of need is belonging. Fourth level is self-esteem. And then the fifth level is self-actualization. Now, what's so interesting about this is that it's alive and well in all of us. All levels are alive and well in all of us. It's not like you reach self-actualization and you're no longer concerned about food, water, and air. It's all happening all the time. And to prove my point that all of us at some level are still fearful, all of us at some level are primal creatures. The guy on the far left, fearing the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed tiger, and fearing strangers. To prove that point, stand up, please. I want you to turn around and introduce yourself to the person behind you. Okay. Okay. That's good. Thanks. That's good. All right, that concludes my presentation. Have a nice day. Okay, now this is another open and courageous moment. Did anybody, when I ask you to turn around and introduce yourself to what could be a stranger, did anybody feel fear? Bullshit. That is just an out-and-out lie. And I know most of you know each other, whatever, but I still believe some percentage of you had a little flutter in your heart, a little seize-up moment like, going to pick on Julianne. Julianne, this morning, did you feel fear when you stood on stage? Yes. Mark, did you have a little hesitance? Maybe, maybe not? Yes. We are primal creatures, and so when you seek to engage the other, to convince the other to adopt whatever you want to adopt, recognize there's a lot of stuff going on in their brain and their heart and their soul. This is complicated, man. And this is what's going on. This equation is happening each and every day of our lives in multiple forms. That as we seek to adopt something, or we are considering adopting anything, we are doing a calculus of determining the relative benefits of the thing versus the relative cost of the thing. And the operative piece of this statement is those two little S's. That there's a complexity to this equation that we ignore. So my example is Starbucks. What's the benefit of a cup of coffee from Starbucks? What is it? What was that? Nothing. Come on. Coffee? Caffeine? Comfort? Warmth? Sugar? Because most of them are loaded with sugar. How about brand association? I'm a Starbucks person. Julianne's a Dunkin' Donuts person. That's actually part of her identity. Right? Right? How about on the cost side, besides the fact that it's $2.85, which is absurd? There are other costs, right? Convenience, cost of the association, right? The label, maybe there's a cost. The point is, the calculus is multivariate. Everything we adopt, everything we buy, everything we engage in is never simple. It's complicated. Money is both a cost and a benefit. That's called investing. Time is both a cost and benefit. That's called working, spending time at work in order to have time called a vacation, right? Physiological and psychological needs, Maslow's hierarchy is both a cost and a benefit. My example is I love ice cream. I fucking love ice cream. And I used to, until I got old, I used to eat a pint of ice cream every day. Impressive, huh? I decided to give up a pint of ice cream every day. That's a cost, right? I gave up the pleasure of a pint of ice cream. The benefit, the psychological, physiological benefit of giving up a pint of ice cream is I lose 10 pounds, I look better, and you all think more of me. Right? So the mashup of all that crap is this. That human beings, in their decision to do or not to buy or not buy, to adopt or not adopt, are doing a subconscious and conscious calculation of multiple variables. Time, function, money for sure, but the big ones, I tell you, are the two other ones. Psychological and physiological. How does this work for me? How does this fit in me? This guy said it best. The cost of a thing is how much of your life you pay for it. We don't think this way. We think as salespeople, as business people, that this is a single varied equation where the trip is the trip and the cost X. That is not what's going on here, people. This is a human thing. A person's decision to go with overseas adventure travel or Grand Circle tour, whatever, is a life decision. Particularly people at my age, I can see the end. I have a fixed amount of time. I have a fixed amount of capacity to realize my truth, to realize my existence. And so when I decide to do something, I'm using a limited inventory, not financial, human. And we need to recognize that. And this is the other important word in this statement. To adopt is this. It's not to buy, it's not to subscribe, it's not to license, it's not to lease. It's to adopt, to take into a relationship. And if the expectation of the customer is they are going to adopt us, whatever us is, the way we're going to affect effective adoption is to understand them. At the end of the day, adoption, and I think of this in the context of adopting a child, is fundamentally about intimacy. We are asking them to make us part of their life, to give us, to Thoreau's point, give us part of their life. In order to deserve that, we must know them. We must become intimate with them. And in order to become intimate with them, we have to start with being intimate with ourselves. And I really do believe you cannot know another until you know yourself. I want to prove the sort of that ROI, that five variable graphic by looking at Uber. Money, time, function, psychological, physiological. And why I believe Uber has a $135 billion valuation. It's not because they're cheaper than cabs. I think it's because they nail the hierarchy of need. Check this out. Right? Physiological, basic, food, water, transportation. They get me from point A to point B. This is the big one. They give me a sense of control. How many here remember cabs? Okay, for those that don't remember cabs, there were these things called cabs that were yellow. And the way it would work, and this is a true story, I had to go to New York. I'm in downtown Boston. There weren't Ubers. There wasn't car sharing. So I called the cab company, and they answer as follows. Hey, ABC Cab. For some reason, all cab people sound like that. I don't know why. And I'm like, can you send a cab to the corner of 108 Lincoln and Tough Street? And and then you're standing there, and for 10 minutes, nothing happens. And you're like, oh, my God, I'm not going to make my flight to New York. And I'm like, I got a huge business deal. Oh, my God, oh, my God. And then nothing happens, so you call back, and you get yelled at. And then eventually a cab shows, and then you go to the airport, but you don't know how long it's going to take to get to the airport. You don't know how much it's going to cost you. You're out of control. And the profundity of Uber and Lyft and the others is you're in control. You know when they're going to show, you know how they're going to get to you, you know how you're going to get to where you're going to get to, you know how much it's going to cost, you know what the car is, you know what the guy's name is, you know what his rating is, you know everything. And I believe that's why Uber has a $135 billion valuation. And then continue on for people like me. When Uber first started, it was very clubby. It's like, ooh, I'm using Uber. It's kind of like Starbucks versus Dunkin' Donuts. I'm an Uber person. You're a Lyft person. And this is where maybe pushing a little makes me feel better about myself and ultimately enables me to realize my life. Kate and I just made the radical decision. We're giving up our car. We live in downtown Boston, no car. We're going all in on car sharing, Zipcar, the whole thing. So here's what's wild. So I did this in preparing for this talk. I'm like, you know what? I should do the exact same exercise with OAT, right? Like see how OAT fares in terms of meeting the Maslow's hierarchy of need. And this is not manipulated in any way, shape, or form. I'm literally sitting at my desk deciding to do that, so I do it. So here we go. You ready? Right? Right? I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It's the same as Uber. It gets me from here to there. Right? I mean, Al and I were together recently, and I was flipping through the catalog. I'm like, the brilliance of this catalog is it answers all my fundamental questions. Right? I'm like, I'm gonna go to Egypt. Like, what is that? Where is Egypt? How do I do that? Like, what exactly is gonna happen? Who will I be with? Like, how much does it cost? Like, I have all these questions. I'm feeling out of control. Oh, look, all the answers are here. Right? Look at the pictures. They look like me. They look like, yeah, right. That's maybe a little problem. They look like they're having fun. They look like people I'd like to hang out with. This is for sure. And then this is really for sure. Right? So the crazy thing is Uber and OAT have the exact same Maslowian hierarchy of need fulfillment stuff going on, which is, I think, why they are both leaders in their respective spaces. I actually said to somebody at Harvard, a kid wanting to do a startup, and the Harvard kids get like kind of confused. They just want to be entrepreneurs. It's less about the idea and more about, I just want to be an entrepreneur. And I said to this one kid, I said, if you really want to be successful, my advice is just focus on the hierarchy of need. Build ideas, create ideas that solve material problems and hit all the levels of the hierarchy. And I'm pretty sure you'll have a viable business. So I actually want to do a little exercise, dig into the details. You have this thing called, OAT has this thing called key competitive advantages or extreme competitive advantages. Is that right? Right? So just play with me here. Where do the advantages fit on the hierarchy? Which need does local experienced trip leaders meet? What's that? All of them? I mean, for me, I'm not in the business, but for me, it definitely meets safety, right? Like, these are experienced, expert people. Like, I'm going to put my life in the hands of somebody, so their experience really matters. Maybe it relates to self-actualization as well. Like, they know their stuff, right? Small group size. Safety, right? Love and belonging, right? I'm going to actually get to know these people. That's a positive. People-to-people experiences. Love and belonging, self-actualization. I mean, we don't need to go through them all, but you see they all fit somewhere on this need chart, right? They all meet some sort of need. But I think this is the big one. They enable overseas adventure travel, Grand Circle, and its travel companies ultimately do this. The pinnacle of the hierarchy of need is self-actualization. And that's what this is, right? Changing people's lives is fundamentally about helping them actualize their life, realize their life, connect with who they actually are, the meaning of themselves in ways that have profound consequence for the rest of their lives. That's the business that OAT is in. And that is what sets up, I almost fell off the stage. That's what sets up thin places, because that's what thin places are. Right? This quote from the article that Julianne sent out a few weeks ago. The last piece. In thin places, we become our more essential selves. Changing people's lives is ultimately maybe even less about changing and more about enabling the lives that are within them. Enabling them to find these moments of connection, of meaning, that help them realize both their magnitude and their tininess. So I want to talk a little bit about what your thin place is and why it's a thin place. And I think the important thing is, why is it a thin place to you? And thank you, by the way, for the 140 people that sent in images of your thin place. My favorite one was the backyard grill. Who had the grill? Thank you very much. Before I get into this, I just want to share. So let me back up. So this whole thing happened because I was sitting at my desk one day, and I was telling Chris Zigmont this. I just randomly found that article. I don't even know how it appeared in my feed. I have no idea. It's from 2012. But it just appeared, and I read this thing, and I'm like, whoa. It called to me, and I immediately grabbed it and sent it to Alan and my kids and a couple other people. I'm like, check this out. And since then, Alan and Harry, and we've all been talking about this stuff, and all sorts of other people are getting involved. I actually had a guy send me a text yesterday going, I want to write a book about it. And, it's taken on a life of its own. But anyway, the point is, as we got this conversation going, Alan and Harriet and Mark Freevert and Bob Weiler, who's on the board, all sort of started doing emails back and forth. And I just thought that I want to share their three sort of reactions. This is from Harriet and Alan. And you know, the coolest thing about this company is they've been clear from the beginning that it was about thin places. This is not like a new idea. This is core to why they did it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Core. It's not like some random mission vision. It's actually fundamental to the why of OAT, or the why of Grand Circle broadly. And then Mark, I don't know if you want to read this or... Okay. What I think Mark brings up, and I really do believe this to be true, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. I think arguably the only way to realize full meaning is to work through the hard stuff, the vulnerabilities, the fears, the doubts. That easy doesn't tend to beget profound. What begets profound is hard. And I think that's a really interesting construct for all of us to live by, that walking through the door of fear, I actually was talking to my sister about this last night, walking through the door of fear becomes a requisite function to realize yourself, realize your capacity. But go back to Maslow, we don't want to walk through the door of fear. We'd rather just stay in the cave, hug our little fur, and fear the woolly mammoth. And so I think Mark's note here, I think, just nails that idea of working through your stuff. And I think the power of travel is it, in a way, kind of forces. It certainly may not force fearful moments, but it forces foreign moments, right? Different moments, things you didn't expect. And all of a sudden you're exposed. And like, how are you going to respond to this? And you're either going to step forward or are you going to run away? And I think the beauty for most of us as travelers is we step forward, and in stepping forward, we realize things about ourselves that we never would have realized. And then Bob's note I love too, his idea of setting one's intentions to be open. So again, back to Maslow. Most people lived closed lives. Most people seek to control, to contain, to avoid exposure to threat, exposure to different, exposure to new. But when we set our intentions to be open, we open our minds, we open our hearts, we step through the door of fear, and holy shit, we realize things about ourselves that we never would have realized before. So, one of the things in studying thin places, thinking about thin places, I came upon this quote, and I can't remember who said it. But I think the last piece that's highlighted is really interesting, and that's the idea that sometimes thin places are moments in time. You know, I think there's this inference that thin places are physical localities or pieces of barbecue equipment. But I think oftentimes there are just moments that are fleeting, that may not be replicatable, like, and I think that's okay. And I think the important message in that is, in the moment, be in the moment, you know, and don't do what humans do, which is we got to get to the next thing. Like, try to slow down and try to relish, and instead of taking the photo, just take the image in, you know, as part of who you are in your life. So, how many read the article? Anybody? Most of you read the article? Eric Weiner suggests, he's the author who wrote it, that thin places, the sort of the concept, if you will, was something from the Celtic period, 13th, 14th century, I don't know, from the windswept islands of Ireland and Scotland. And that certainly may be true. But in preparing for this, I'm like, well, but maybe there's some other sources that this concept came from. And coincidentally, I just finished reading this book. Anybody read this book? A couple people? So it's really well done, really interesting, brief history of humankind. And in thinking about the book, through the lens of this concept of thin places, I came to realize that if Harari wanted to do a sequel, he could do this. That the history of mankind is in some part a history of humans seeking thin places. And he talks a fair amount about the rise of religion and ideology, and I came to realize this. And I'm not a religious person per se. I think of myself as a spiritual person, but I don't subscribe to any form of religion. But what I came to realize is virtually every religion, every ideology has in some part a thin place component to its framework, its methodology, its approach, its belief system. Hinduism, the chakra system, third eye is about seeing and being differently, right? That's basically what thin places are. Buddhism, the Noble Paths, there's a component of that. It's about seeing and being differently. Feng Shui even has a component of seeing and being differently. Then we've got our friend Maslow, self-actualization, seeing and being differently. Another conversation I had about a month ago, one of my best friends is a guy named Mark Baker. He's a rabbi. He runs Combined Jewish Philanthropies. And I was telling him about thin places. And he laughs. I'm like, what? He goes, and he wrote me a follow-up email. That in Judaism, there's this concept called midbar. Places that often create an experience of slight dislocation, Diane, right? Slight dislocation, otherwise known as fear, maybe, that paradoxically allow us to come home to ourselves. Back to Weiner's comment, realize our essential selves. And so what you're seeing, you see what I see? This is a universal truth. This is a universal construct that we have been after since the beginning of time. And then this is when Chris, does drugs and maybe gets a little crazy. I started thinking about, does this apply to dreams? Is it possible that dreams are actually thin place moments? And I started studying that, and there's one guy that I found who sort of supported my theory, and he wrote this. And at the end he says, because your dreams provide you a metaphoric commentary on yourself. At the end of the day, our existence is a function, or the opportunity of our existence is to realize the meaning of our existence. Right? And so what you're seeing is everything from ideology to dream state are kind of sort of oriented towards enabling or helping them. And then it got really wacky, and I'm like, does this apply at a biological level? And I ended up having a conversation with somebody a couple of days ago who revealed that there's a thing called the pineal gland in the middle of the brain. Anybody know about the pineal gland? So what's crazy about the pineal gland, it's the thing that, it's a very mysterious organ. They don't really know why it exists. It does apparently issue melatonin, shoots out melatonin. But the other thing that it does, which is really kind of crazy, is that when a child is born, the pineal gland produces this stuff called DST, which is an enabler of the transition from non-life to life. And that when you die, the pineal gland does the exact same thing, issues DST, which is an enabler from life to non-life. And I would argue both ends of those are thin places. Anyway. And then lastly on this stuff, so again, just sort of incredibly serendipitously, my friend Melissa sends me a text, I don't know, like 24 hours ago, with this, out of the blue. She doesn't know about thin places. She doesn't know what I'm working on. She doesn't know we're having this thing. She doesn't know anything. And she sends me this. This quote from Deepak Chopra, in the last piece being, when you die, you will enter the same unknown, and in that moment, you will have a good chance of feeling that you were never more alive. These thin place moments, whether it's on exit, entry, or in between, are fundamentally moments of never being more alive. Okay, group exercise. You ready? Why do we stare at fire? Anybody here ever stared at fire? Anybody here ever stared at water? Anybody know why? There's no right or wrong. Just give me a what's your name, Richard?
Yeah.
Give me an answer.
Oh, fire is visually different. I mean, it's ethereal.
Okay.
And water, for me, water, I guess I would say I listen to water more than I stare at it.
Okay.
Not
You listen.
only the ocean, but
Okay.
streams and brooks.
Great.
Again, because it's different.
Yeah, it's great. There's no right or wrong. This is not like a quiz. I'm just curious what you all think. Anybody else want to share?
Infinite possibility.
Infinite possibility. Tell me more about that.
Being able to go far, far beyond myself without leaving myself.
Go far, far beyond myself without leaving myself. I love that. Anybody else? Somebody in the back, way back. You say, you speak up? Chaos or patterns, okay. Yeah. Way, way back.
Always a new shape.
What do you say? Okay. Yeah. Quiets your mind. Okay, great. Tell me more about elemental forces.
It just seemed to be very much at the core of human life.
Seems to be at the core of human life. So this is my theory aligns with your theory. That part of our mesmerization with fire and water is we are from it. It is the mother source of our existence, along with earth and air. That's why a lot of the ideologies have those four elements at the center, because we are a function of it. And I have this like crazy view that the DNA, the genetic material that is within us, actually was once part of other components of Earth. That the molecules that we are made of were at one point molecules of other things, enabled by fire, water, earth, and air. So my theory is the reason why they are so important to us is because they connect to us and we connect to them at a very, very subconscious level. So here's an interesting little factoid. So I got like 136 thin place images. This is just a screen grab of some of them. Check this out. Check that out. You guys see that? Something like 83 of the 130 were water, 20 some were mountains, some were both, and then there was other. What is going on there? There's a relationship we have with water. By the way, you know that the human body is 58% water? When I used to eat ice cream, it was lower, but pretty interesting, right? So my final point on this part, this is where it gets a little wacky. So I have my own ideology. One more, just bear with me, one more. And I've been talking about this for the last 2 months. I was actually at a party last night, a cocktail thing, and I talked about it. And what's interesting to me is nobody has rejected it as a potentially logical construct. And the way it works is this. I believe the majority of people live at the first 2, 3 levels of the hierarchy. And then there's another group of people that push beyond those levels into esteem and self-actualization. And this is my like wacky visual. Below that bar is 2 dimensions, and above that bar is 3 dimensions. And I believe realizing thin places is a 3rd dimension existence. Thin places are complex propositions that reveal meaning. They're nuanced, they're sophisticated, they're dimensional. Like your experience was not simply, oh, I was with the gorillas and then I came home. It changed who you are, potentially at a biological level. Like who knows? But the sad truth is that many people live their lives in a 2-dimensional way. And the opportunity for all of us is to push into the third dimension, which is a dimension that involves certainly self-esteem, because you've got to have the confidence to make the choice of courage versus fear, but ultimately enables your own self-actualization, the realization of your true capacities as a human. And I think about this. You guys know Flat Stanley? How many of you know Flat Stanley? Anybody want to explain Flat Stanley to the people that don't know Flat Stanley? Yeah, you'll explain? Okay, stand up and explain.
So there's a book about Flat Stanley, and in elementary school, you're often given a Flat Stanley to mail all over the world to friends, family, and encourage them to forward it to other people and have pictures of Flat Stanley seeing and doing all variety of things.
Great, perfect. Let's give her a round of applause. My point here is, who the hell wants to live a Flat Stanley life, a two-dimensional life? And the other point is, from an OAT Grand Circle perspective, our job is not to create Flat Stanleys, enable Flat Stanleys, but it's actually to help people move into the third dimension of their existence, to realize thin places, and in realizing thin places, realize the full meaning of their lives. And this quote from Aldous Huxley, I think, underscores that this is about the human. This is not about the thing. It's not about the valley or the mountain or the water or the barbecue. It's actually about what the human brings to that situation. What Diane brought to that situation when the gorillas was a third dimension capacity to turn two-dimensionally. Was like she was just hanging out with a bunch of gorillas into a life moment that fundamentally changed her. So then I get a little weird, or maybe I'm always a little weird. I think this is a question for each of us as humans, as individuals. How do we move towards more third dimension experience or existence in our lives when thin places are no longer rare, when thin places are in us, among us, and by us? I said to somebody earlier, I think Joan and I were talking about it, I think the ultimate thin place is within. It's actually not a physical location. It would have been hard to show an image of that, I understand. But when you are connected to you, the truth of you, the value of you, the meaning of you, when you see clearly why you are, who you are, how you are, I think that's like the ultimate thin place moment. So the question is, how do we ensure that more of our lives are in the third dimension? We're actualizing ourselves, the full meaning of our lives. And I boil it down to two fundamental things, and I've already talked about one of them. We must choose courage. You know, fear is the great disabler, right? I think about my life. I was fearful for the first 40 years of my life. And I had a successful business, whatever, but at the end of the day, I was fundamentally afraid. And I think about, and I don't have regret, but I do sort of think about what I missed as a consequence of consistently choosing fear. And if we want to live in the third dimension, we want to realize ourselves, we want to have more thin place moments, I think we have to look in the mirror and say to ourselves, it's time to choose courage more. And then the other part, which I haven't talked about, but it kind of goes hand in hand, is the issue of self-love. One of the fastest way to deal, or the best ways to deal with fear, is to find your love of yourself. In finding love of self, all of a sudden, you're no longer fearful of what other people think of you because you're actually okay with who you are. The reason why people hate to speak in public is because we fear judgment. Like, what if they don't like me? Like, what if I make a fool of myself, right? That's why we're afraid. But if I actually love myself for who I am, the dark, the light, the plus, the minus, the everything, I'm actually less afraid because I don't really care whether you like me or not because I love myself. Now, I will say, on both the fear front and the love front, that's not like a flicking of a switch. It's a lifelong proposition. But you can decide, leaving here, I've now added to the 2%, you can decide to work on both these things. There's another question that we should ask ourselves. In the course of this, in the context of this business, this company, how do we as a collective, not just the employees, but the customers, the travelers, how do we mold and shape what is already an amazing value proposition to even be even greater in its ability to deliver third dimension excellence, and with that, thin place everything? And I don't think anybody here needs motivation for this, but if you, in case you do need motivation, here you go. I think this company went out of business because they were a two-dimensional company. I don't think they understood the opportunity they had. I don't think they understood the responsibility they had. I don't think they, I don't know. Alan will probably correct me later, but I don't know. But I bet you they didn't get it. Okay, so that's the why. And then how do we actually do this? And I think, again, you guys know 90% of this, 99% of this. I don't believe you guys are selling anything. I don't. I don't think you're in the business of selling. I think you're in the business of this. I think you're in the business of intimately connecting with your customers in ways that allow you to allow them to realize themselves. That's the business you're in. You can call it travel, sure, but that's the business you're in. And the way you do that is this, right? This is not about bottom of the hierarchy stuff. This is about top of the hierarchy stuff. This is about enabling meaning. So how do you get better at enabling meaning? And I go back to the beginning question. Do we understand humanity really? And there's two sides of it. Do we understand our humanity? And do we understand their humanity? Remember I said you can't really understand somebody else unless you first understand yourself? So we need to take 5 minutes and look at this. So the first part of understanding our humanity is to ask the question, how have we not changed? And this is my belief. Maslow's hierarchy of need is alive and well in all of us. That part hasn't changed, and I refer to it now as Maslow's law. How have we changed? And I refer to this, Moore's law. Anybody know Moore's law? So Moore's law, a mathematician came up with this, I think probably 30, 40 years ago. And the gist of it is computing power doubles every year, and then doubling every year, the cost of computing is cut in half. It's like an algorithm. And that's caused this, right? A holy shit acceleration of technology. Technology is now in everything. The Internet of Things, like your refrigerator can talk to you and order for you and make your food and, I don't know, eat it. But the profundity of this curve, I argue, is less about the things that are being invented and more this. It's the effect of everything, of the network on everything, including human beings. So on the one hand, we haven't changed at all. We're Maslowian primal creatures. And on the other hand, this. Anybody here older, 15 years old or older? Has anything changed in your life? Right? But what's crazy is, as humans, we don't take stock of what has changed, nor do we take stock of who we actually are and always have been. We don't take stock of anything. I was at a conference recently, and I looked out at the very large crowd, and I said, has anybody here thought about your behavior in the last 24 hours? Like actually how you behave, why you make the choices you make? Not one hand. We have changed, man. So what do we know about today's humans? This. Anybody here remember banks? Do you remember in order to deposit a check, you had to go to the bank? I know the millennials are like freaking out right now. And you would wait in line for like 25 minutes. Not today, man. It's all about everybody. The expectation, conscious or subconscious, is I don't want friction in the system. This is also true. You know, you can now use social media to send money to people. I almost fell off again. You know, Amazon. Amazon's business is retail, right? Right? Well, it turns out 90% of Amazon's revenue, or profit rather, comes from cloud storage. They make all their money not on retail. And this is definitely true. Like in the old days, brands could do what brands wanted to do and the customer was subjected to them. And in today's world, that's the opposite is true. Humans are in charge. And I came up with this little device called codes. It's a way of capturing how things have changed in terms of humans being in charge. And number one, they expect control. Control. They expect options, personalization. They want it when they want it, the way they want it. They expect disposability. They don't want to be tied down. They expect experience. Products are no longer enough. And they expect sustainability. They expect the companies and brands they work with to be trying to do better by the environment. And I was actually just reading a piece in the news this morning that sustainability and environmental, ESG is finally kicking in, and big companies are taking notice because consumers are demanding it. And something else has happened. What I really mean is there's a growing realization that digital anything without connection to humans doesn't really get you very far. And I use an example, online education. So I used to work at Harvard in the education space. I'm sure you know that. This is the completion rate of online courses. The massively open courses, 5% of students or subscribers complete the course. 95% fail. Or not fail, but they quit. That's not working, man. And I think what happened is this. Back to humans and how simple we are, even though we're complicated. So the rise of digital, and people are like, holy shit, we can do what we do far more efficiently by moving it to digital. In education, instead of having 50 students show up in our classroom and take physical space and lights and whatever, we can actually now teach 500 students online. So our reach is 10x, our cost of goods is like 0, win, win, win. And you're like, well, what about completion rate? What about efficacy? And so what we did is we did this, and then we get over there and we're like, oh shit. This doesn't actually work. I mean, it works in terms of it's more efficient, but it's kind of problematic because it doesn't really work for the customer. And so my belief is this is where it ends up. I mean, this is called a blended model where we as a business look at the analog, the human components, we look at digital components, and we figure out how to meld them together in just the right way where we deliver real value for our customer, but we deliver it in an efficient and effective manner. And it's harder. This is harder. It's easier to be all analog or all digital. To be both is harder, but that's our responsibility. And I also have this view, as we contemplate what a blended model looks like, we have to recognize that different media, different devices, different interfaces have different roles in engagement with our customers. A smartphone can do some things, but it can't do other things. Alan and Harry and I were together recently, and I had the new catalog, which I think is just amazing. And I said to Alan, so I have a brother, older, who's married to a Karen. My brother's Gary, Karen, and Karen's a very fearful person. She's lovely, but she's just really fearful. And my brother, they're both retired. My brother really wants to travel, but Karen's fearful. And I said, I'm going to mail them a catalog. And here's what's going to happen. The catalog's going to sit on their coffee table in their living room. And Karen won't open it right away. And then like a week will go by, and she's sitting there, and she'll be like, I'm going to look at it. And she's going to open it up. And she's going to see some pictures that like, well, those look like people I'd like to be with. And then over the course of time, that catalog, she's going to get more and more into it and more and more into it and more and more into it. And then finally, one day, my brother's going to come home and Karen's going to say to him, I'd like to go to Egypt. That's not going to happen on a smartphone. I'm not saying there's not a role for a smartphone. I'm just saying that in designing experience, in designing interface, in designing a business that works for humans, we have to get more rigorous about understanding the context of these things, the role of these things, and how it all really should fit together to create meaning and value for our customers. The last thing I want to explore or talk about a little bit is remember that, understanding humanity, us and them. I think the other challenge for all of us is there's a them that's everybody in the world, and then there's a them that's our specific customer. And the problem, it's kind of like Katie and I, we're 15 years apart, and I don't think about what it's like to be a 45-year-old. And I need to. If I want our engagement, our conversations, our partnership to be effective for both of us, I need to work harder at understanding them specifically. And so if the average age, or I don't even know if this is true, but let's say the average age of a Grand Circle OAT customer is 65 or whatever, how well does everybody in this room understand who that person is? And my bet is not that well, and my bet is that's a wonderful opportunity for the whole organization. I'm 61, and the best way to understand me is on the back of a quote from Mary Steenburgen that I just sent Alan the other day. You guys know Mary Steenburgen? Actress. So it turns out 10 years ago, she decided she wanted to be a songwriter. She didn't walk away completely from acting, but pretty much, and she's been songwriting like in Nashville for 10 years. And in an interview, she said this, and I just want to read it. People said, you already have a career. Why are you doing this? Because my heart is desiring it so fiercely, I can't ignore it. If you're lucky enough to be alive, why would you creatively kill yourself off? And this is my favorite line. Why not say yes to all of it at any age? And if you want a headline to carry out of here in terms of who the OAT customer is or the Grand Circle customer is, that's the headline. Why not say yes? Diane said yes, right, Diane? You said yes. You said, why not? Why not? Okay, so the last thing I'm going to leave you with is, it's actually not a question. It's a request. And I actually make this kind of request, I don't know, 90% of the times I speak. As you go forward, don't go forward as salespeople, service people, business people. Don't go forward. Or travelers even. Go forward as humans. Go forward as humans who have an opportunity to realize their essential selves, to use Weiner's comment, right? To realize the truth of their full capacity, the true meaning, the true potential of their life. And in doing that, go forward with a commitment to helping other humans realize theirs. I mean, if you think about X number of billion lives on this earth, we can either realize their full potential or we can just allow it to flop around in the second dimension. And again, we need to care about each other and we need to care about the collective, and I think the way to care about the collective is to live in the third dimension and to enable thin places both within us and outside of us. And with that, I thank you very much.